Welcome to the Life During and After GLP-1 podcast. I've got a guest with me today, and I have Brian, who I met on TikTok probably about a year ago, I think is when we first got connected. But I'm excited because I want to hear your story, of course, with GLP-1s, but I know you've got a lot of thoughts, you got a lot of opinions, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And while you guys are listening to us, I do have Brian's TikTok linked up in the show notes, so make sure you're connected with him. He's very interactive, so follow, like, comment, all the stuff that he's putting out. But first, let's talk about how you got introduced to a GLP-1. So probably a fair amount of research and looking into this. What was that like for you, just getting started with all this?
Yeah, it was interesting because at the time I had heard of like Ozempic, and that was pretty much it. And everyone's heard those commercials with that jingle that gets stuck in your head forever. That was kind of my knowledge of GLP-1s were limited to Ozempic, limited to like kind of the zeitgeist where people were starting to talk about it in the context of like off-label, like weight management medication kind of thing, in addition to diabetes care. It had rattled around in my head as maybe something I would, as someone who's kind of battled with obesity since I was a teenager, basically preteen really, was something that I thought I might ask about at some point, if push came to shove. But the catalyst for me getting on a GLP-1 medication was really more health related than it was purely weight related for me, because I was dealing with a whole sort of confluence of health issues that seemed to kind of pop up really fairly in rapid succession for me. At the time I started, I was 43 years old, and I was feeling like I was 73 years old. I was dealing with a really challenging blood pressure case. So, they re-diagnosed it as what they call resistant hypertension, because essentially the standard pharmaceutical treatments for blood pressure just weren't working for me. So I was on 3 different blood pressure medications. Then I was on 4 different blood pressure medications simultaneously, trying to get this crazy high blood pressure under control. There were points where I was having what they called hypertensive crisis, where my blood pressure was just inexplicably super, super high, essentially causing a risk of having a stroke at any moment, So that made me feel very ill. On top of that, I was dealing with a pretty severe case of sleep apnea, started to, go to the doctor more regularly because of these issues, and discovered that I was like pretty high level pre-diabetic and really close to being able to potentially get a diagnosis as a type 2 diabetic. And that was sort of a scary prospect for me, thinking about that. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was added to that like chart list for me of things that were going wrong with me. And then they realized I had a whole bunch of metabolic challenges like insulin resistance and stuff like that seemed to be contributing to all of this, not to mention that I was also, pretty severely obese. And my BMI was over 40. And so I was really struggling, and I had 2 doctors, my primary care provider and nephrologist, kidney doctor, who was trying to figure out the source of the blood pressure issue. And they both said, this GLP-1 medication is showing a lot of improvement in all of these issues that you're having that are generally considered sort of comorbidities to obesity. And so you might find some improvement with this because nothing else is really working for you. So let's roll the dice, see if your insurance will approve it. And if it works, then we'll monitor you and see if it fixes things for you. And it did.
So there's quite a few things that you hit on that I want to touch on. One, just from the basics, you mentioned that at 43 years old, all of these health concerns really just seem to, there might have been some stuff there, but it just really cascaded very, very quickly. I think, one, that's something that a lot of people, when you start saying that, I'm like nodding along, because I think for a lot of us that is kind of how that goes. But I also want to point out, and as we get more into what you're doing now, when we get there, you really can change this stuff. And where the GLP-1s can help in the right scenario, they really can. They really can assist. Mm-hmm. The other thing, I mean, it sounds like you tried a lot of different things, and you were working with your team of doctors, and then they were trying to try different things, rule things out. And then this was kind of something that you kind of looked at it as like, hey, this might help you. I guess the question I have is, are we talking, was this like in, because GLP-1 time frame seems to be, it's changed a lot and it's continuing to change. Is this like 2023? Is that probably when this was happening? Okay.
2020. Well, it was 2023 and when I was dealing with all of those health issues, and then 2024, mid 24, I was finally on the medication. So I would say it was like a full year of trying to figure out why all these health issues were kind of collapsing on me at once. And the GLP-1, I started 2 years ago this month. So May 3rd of 2024 was when I took my first dose of, it was Zepbound in my case.
And it was, and what you, as something you said, your doctor said to you, it really kind of stood out to me too as well. Let's try to get this through to your insurance, which now, given the landscape, like there's so many different avenues with this. So things definitely have changed. Now, for you, and are you still taking the medication, or did you just take it? You are still taking the medication.
I'm still on it. Yeah. Yep. I view it as a treatment for all those underlying chronic conditions. And just like if I went off my blood pressure medication, I would expect the blood pressure to go back up. Sort of the same thing with the GLP-1 for me. It is, if I have any say in it, I'm on it for life, because it is the one thing that seems to be regulating the underlying systemic issues that were causing all of those other problems for me.
So in this, I think, because there seems to be two different trains of thought. And my big answer on everything health and fitness is it depends, and your answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But with this, it's like some people look at it as this is the jump start to lose the weight. But I like it. And the other one is this is a lifelong medication. But I like for what you just said. You're like, look, I have all these underlying conditions. If I stop taking the meds, like it's just like I were to stop taking any other medication. So this really is a lifelong tool for you, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Yes, absolutely. And, it's, again, my perspective on that is the weight loss was a huge benefit in all of this. And I would be lying if I said that wasn't part of the motivation, but the immediacy of the health concerns sort of superseded that for me. It was kind of like, whatever I can do to get those things under control, like if that helps and the weight comes off a little bit, great. I did not expect to respond to the medication as quickly or as well as I did in terms of weight loss, in addition to all of the other health stuff that it fixed. So I was fortunate in that sense. But because of that, the health pieces kind of are something that I continuously monitor. Whereas from a weight perspective, I'm kind of where I need to be. So the ongoing journey for me is really now about maintaining the good health part of it, even more so than, being concerned about the weight aspects of it.
So, and when you say you're monitoring all the other health aspects of it, is this getting your blood work checked every so often? Is this doing, what is that process like?
Yeah, I think I've had more blood work done in the last 2 years than I had in the previous 43 years of my life. I'll be 46 this year, so prior to starting the GLP-1. And yeah, it is sort of this continuous monitoring, to make sure everything remains in check. Actually my blood work is better than it ever was, even in my, late 20s and 30s. Even my doctor commented on the fact that cholesterol was never an issue for me, really, fortunately. But even he was commenting on like, your cholesterol numbers are better than most like 25-year-olds that I, order blood work for. And I'm like, I'll take it, because, I never thought I'd hear anything like that before in my life. So yeah, it's a consistent monitoring of, my metabolic and lipid panels, and keeping an eye on the blood pressure, and, just making sure that, you don't take for granted that the medication is just going to be a permanent fix for all of these things. So, even with the weight in check, just, I'm like everyone else, I'm aging. So we keep an eye on those things to make sure that I don't need any additional treatment along the line. But yeah, it's paying close attention these days to my health overall in a kind of a holistic way, in a way that I never really thought to previously.
Yeah. And I think what you said about blood work is exactly what my experience was. And I think it's pretty common. Like I used to get this stuff done when I absolutely had to. And then I would have, I'd have checkups with my doctor, and he'd be like, did you get the blood panel done? No, we'll do it next time. And now it's just a basic panel, getting it done every 6 months or so, just to make sure. And I do think, one, I feel like as we go through life, 20s and 30s, we don't even think about it. Then for a variety of reasons, mortality starts to seem very, very real in our 40s. And I think we start looking at stuff different. So I'm really glad to hear you talk about the health aspects of this, and not just the weight loss portion of it. But when you started taking the GLP-1, how quickly did you notice a change in your blood panels or in overall health?
So I would say probably within the first 3 months, I was showing absolute noticeable improvement kind of across the board. So like the A1C level started to come down right away, and I kind of relatively rapidly came out of the sort of pre-diabetic state, right? And I was up there, like they were like, a couple more blood tests like this, and we're going to call you type 2. So that was pretty remarkable for me. So it kind of worked in that respect right away. But the weight also came off very quickly for me. So I think that contributed to it. I was, people throw out like sort of non-scientific terminology around this, but a lot of people have called me like an early responder or a super responder, because the lower doses of the medication really did something for me. And that's not necessarily a common story. So I felt fortunate in that respect that it didn't take a lot of the medication for it to actually start doing a lot of good for me pretty early on. So, I think I lost in the first month like 18 pounds. Probably a ton of that was inflammation and water weight, but that's a lot in the first month.
Yeah.
And the first 2 months, it was like, I took a lot off right in the first couple of months. And as that like inflammation came down and the weight started to come down, all of the other health markers improved. And within a year, I had a follow-up sleep study, and I no longer had sleep apnea. And that I never thought was going to come from this, because my sleep apnea was so severe and I was so CPAP dependent just to get a decent night's sleep, that it's amazing for me that for the last year, I haven't had to use a CPAP. So a lot of the health improvements really started to show up fairly quickly for me. And then over the course of that first year, it was sort of like one by one, checking the boxes of remission and improvement for a lot of those conditions that drove me towards getting this prescription in the first place.
So, and something else, you mentioned the weight was coming off really fast, and I don't care who it is, anybody, we all love seeing the scale go down.
Oh, absolutely.
And we all love seeing the scale go down quickly. Now, tying two things together. One thing I know from working in the fitness space is when you lose weight fast, the faster you lose it, the more time it takes for your mind to kind of catch up. You also mentioned you and I are a couple of years apart, but grew up at roughly the same time. You mentioned really battling weight when you were a teenager. And I remember the body image concerns that I had, because, and this isn't taking away from anybody else's body image struggles that they've been through, but we don't really talk as much about men in the 90s being peppered with washboard abs, big shoulders like this, these bodybuilding magazines with like the steroid guys on it. And they're just like, here's a 10-minute circuit a day and you can look like this too. And we didn't know any better.
Right.
So like, how was that for you mentally as the scale was going down? How challenging was it? And how challenging is it to like really wrap your mind around your body's doing this, but your mind is where it's at?
Yeah. So for me, it really was the two parallel tracks. Like the health piece was one track for me, but the weight loss and sort of body image piece was another track. Yeah. And they were both equally important to me. One felt immediately urgent, but the other one was massively beneficial for my sort of mental health and well-being, and feeling like I was, it was very validating to see the medication working, because it showed me really quickly that the weight was caused by a condition, by a chronic disease process. Because like you were saying, we see all of these images when we're younger of what like sort of the male archetype is supposed to look like. And oftentimes we know, like you're saying, that's inflated, and there's some of the story we're not even seeing, but those are the images we were sold. I feel like it's happening again now. Actually, we're having kind of a resurgence of this this messaging that is telling people that, your appearance should be a certain way or you're not valid. Right. And that's concerning that's kind of having a resurgence now. But yeah, that was always in my head. I was always bothered by being an obese person and, not being able to achieve that body and also just doing all the things that everyone said to do and they didn't work for me. I was somebody that was in the gym at my heaviest weight, lifting weights and doing cardio. I was somebody who did every imaginable diet plan under the sun from, roughly 1992 to, 2024, and we could list them and everybody would recognize them. And none of those were really sustainable, enjoyable, and caused any long lasting benefit for me. So I very much internalized I'm stuck this way. I'm one of the unfortunate people who just hasn't been blessed with whatever the genetics or whatever it is that all these other people have that allow them to achieve that through doing these things. And I can't. So the weight loss has been hugely beneficial for me. And it has taken my mind a lot of time, sometimes throughout this 2-year journey to catch up to what I was seeing in the mirror, and seeing those changes. Cause I spent so many years of my life kind of self-identified as, I'm that fat kid and I'm still that fat kid, even in my 40s, I was that fat kid kind of, and carried that with me. And, it just sort of, takes a while for the brain, I think, sometimes to catch up to what you're seeing because it's just so ingrained in how you see yourself, and all those messages that we were, sort of sent throughout life, about, that being such a problem that you're not, that your body isn't what it should be. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, that's been significant for me, from a self-image perspective, from a self-esteem perspective, and just from kind of walking the world with more sort of self-assuredness and comfort, as a result of this.
And I think it's important I always like to call out when we're talking about self-esteem, body image, things that have to do with how you see yourself. I don't think we're ever perfect. I like to say that 85% of the time that I try to operate from a calm headspace and do things deliberately, that gives me the other 15% of the time for my mind to go wherever it is. But that's kind of a buffer for me to pull it back. But it is crazy because, I mean, there'll be things. Sometimes you are that 14-year-old that just never is trying everything but doesn't feel, you feel like you're not being seen, but you're being seen at the same time in a very weird way, and it never 100% goes away. But I think kind of taking ownership of it and trying to untangle it, I think really is helpful. Now you did hit your goal weight. Congratulations, because again, this is something to celebrate and always take the time to appreciate. But what was that like for you?
So it was interesting because, first of all, my goal weight changed numerous times along that first year because my expectations were low. Based on what I just said, I'd tried everything and nothing really worked that well, or for very long. And so my expectations started out low. So I was like, great, if I lose 40 pounds on this medication, I will be happy as can be and will take that to the bank and go on with the rest of my life healthier and in a little bit better of a situation physically. And it just kept going. So I kept moving the goalpost for myself because it was working. And I kind of needed to be convinced that this wasn't just going to be another thing that I was going to quote unquote fail. Right. And so, when I finally hit the goal weight, which still kind of was an arbitrary number in my mind. So from my starting weight to what I landed at was approximately 95 pounds. I had lost a little bit from my high weight already. So my total weight loss is probably over 100, but on the GLP-1, it's about 95. And when I landed there, I kind of had an interesting realization was that number was kind of meaningless. Beyond the health improvements, it was also sort of very abstract. It was am I actually happy with how far I've taken this? Am I actually happy with what I'm seeing in the mirror at the end result of this? And I don't mean that from a perspective of perfectionism, right? It wasn't about that. It wasn't like, oh, well, I hit my goal weight in my mid 40s with the full realization that I was never going to have the body of a 20-year-old who was never obese, right? Like that has downstream effects throughout your life. I knew I was aging. I knew my body was not going to snap into a shape that I never had in the first place and literally was not necessarily capable of. So I think I went into that with realistic eyes open for what that would be. But it was almost more like people kept using the term maintenance. And I was like, I don't want to maintain this. I feel like I don't want to lose any more weight, but isn't there more that I can do now that I've reclaimed my health and I feel better than I did, when I was hit 45 years old, I felt better than I did when I was 30 physically and more capable than I did when I was 30. So I sort of set out a challenge for myself to say, can't I do more to improve not just what I see in the mirror, but how I feel about it, but also like what I'm physically capable of. And so for me, maintenance never became let's hold that number steady and at all costs make sure that I never go up in any way, shape, or form. It became for me like, so can I use this sort of jumping off point to actually like get strong and build muscle and focus on body composition as opposed to just the number on the scale? And I kind of started to have a realization that that number is composed of a pretty complex equation of like, what is your body fat percentage? What is your amount of lean muscle mass? What is your bone density? And all of those things matter and matter even more as you age. And so it just kind of was one of those classic aha moments for me that like that the number on the scale isn't giving me that sense of fulfillment that I thought it was, because it's just a number. It doesn't tell me what that number is composed of. If I have literally no muscle tone, that number is going to mean that I am less healthy, even though it's my goal number, than I would be if that was composed of more muscle mass and less body fat. And it didn't mean I was strong. It didn't mean that I was as cardiovascularly healthy as I could have been. It didn't mean any of that. It just meant that I had lost body mass, whether it was fat or muscle mass, to a certain number that I had in my mind kind of made up, and that my doctor was like, sure, that sounds good. And so that was an education for me, but it was also a motivator, that it was like, it doesn't have to be about obsessing over the scale and being consumed with maintaining a number. It can be about kind of optimizing my health for the sake of longevity, and also being able to focus on other goals that I think will continue to make me feel well and better. And I mean that like well in terms of health, and better about what I was seeing in the mirror.
What I really like about this is, because weight had the number, even when it had changed throughout the process here, had always been a focal point of things. And I think a lot of times when people hit that number, they panic because they're like, I've been doing this forever. Now what? I'm going to try to lose more weight because this is what I do. You looked at it, and I love this, as a jumping off point into, okay, here's where I am. I got there. I appreciate this, but what can I do now? And then I think, again, like, I feel like as we get older, this becomes more of a longevity game. And it's and it's just what you said. It's like, yes, I hit the number, but what about my lean mass? What about, body fat? What about, quality of life? Because I think that is what it turns into. Now, is there, and then this is pretty much where you are right now with things, right? Like current. Yeah. So do you see kind of what, after you're really focusing on composition and strength, do you already have a goal that you're thinking about? Or is this something that once you take care of this, you're like, hey, I've already pivoted after losing the weight. I'll just check it out then and see what happens and see where I want to go.
Yeah, for me, it really feels like it's hard to set any specific goal, because once I've shifted my mind towards building muscle mass and doing strength training and just sort of thinking about my own physical capability, that seems like there doesn't necessarily have to be a specific end goal. The number on the scale is pretty concrete, right? Like that's an absolute. When you get into the space of like, what am I capable of? hopefully that doesn't feel like it has a ceiling, at least not a self-imposed one, right? And that's kind of where I am with it, is just sort of like, well, let's see where I can take this. I'm already happy with the number on the scale. In fact, that number is going up now because I'm adding muscle density. And so you have to wrap your head around that too. When you spent your whole life basically trying to get that number down, and then all of a sudden you're realizing, oh, well, I might have to accept that number increasing, but it's increasing in a way that's healthy. It's increasing in a way that doesn't mean I'm getting fat, quote unquote, but it means that I'm building, body mass in a helpful way, in a constructive way. So for me, it's like hard to think of a goal, because it's sort of like, what's next? What can I do next? I had an interesting moment in the gym last night where it was like, I had this realization that it was like, oh, the last time I was here, because I work out at home a lot, and sometimes I'll go to the actual gym,
Sure.
When I want to do something I can't do with the equipment I have at home. And I'm like, well, I'm pushing a lot heavier weight now than I was the last time I was here because of the work that I've been doing at home. And it's like, it wasn't a goal. It wasn't like, oh, next time I do this, I'm gonna push 100 pounds, but then I did. And so it's like, keep going, right? And that's sort of the thought process for me, is like, while I'm young enough and physically capable enough to keep going, why put that artificial ceiling in place or pressure of a goal? It feels like at this point, it's kind of now a lifelong project of staying as capable, youthful, and vital as I can for as long as I can, because I think we all know, and there's even evidence data out there that, as people age, the more physically active they are, the more they focus on their body composition, the better off they are in terms of their outcomes as they become elderly and they age, and the more likely they are to have independence and to sustain, long-term health. So that's in my head now. That's kind of the goal. Feels far out. It's like, well, let's try to get to 80, maybe longer, and let's see if you can make 80 feel like 60, since 45 feels like 25.
I really, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I love the fluid approach to what you're doing next, because I do think this is what life is, and I think it's really easy for people that have been stuck in weight loss mode to have the tunnel vision. But what you're saying, instead of the tunnel, is like, everything's wide open, which is great. And it's funny because normally when I wrap things up, I will go on to a rant about quality of life and doing this as long as you can. You just did that for me, and I don't even have to say anything. So basically, guys, listen to what Brian said. But as we wrap up, I do have your TikTok in the show notes. So definitely, if you guys aren't followed and connected with him there yet, go ahead and do that. Linktree is also there. But is there anything else that you want to leave us with today?
I think the only thing that I would say is that I feel like all of these things are very intertwined: obesity, fitness, wellness, health. And so often we end out finding ourselves deferring to kind of the toxic diet culture kind of mindset, because that's often, for folks who've suffered from obesity, just been the only messaging we've ever heard or been given about this. So I think it's really, for me, as a parting thought, is the most important thing is to kind of allow ourselves to free ourselves from that narrative, because once you do, it becomes a space in which you can kind of heal some of those wounds about your perception of your own failures or misgivings, or your lack of willpower, whatever it might be, and really just kind of focus on forward without being concerned about others' perception or the sort of societal mindset about what it means for somebody to improve their health, and why what their motivation should be to do that. So that's kind of my biggest thing, is like, let's put some of that verbiage, terminology, and thought process of the past behind us, and just kind of focus on doing the best you can for yourself wherever you are in the journey.
I love it. This has been a great conversation. A lot of wonderful nuance and angles that we've been able to take these topics on. But Brian, thank you for coming on, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.